The champagne glass didn't shatter because she dropped it. It shattered because her hand went numb the moment she saw him. He was supposed to be a fading memory, the sick, broken man she left in a cold apartment 5 years ago to chase a brighter future with someone else. But the man walking onto the stage wasn't a ghost. He was the new head of surgery, and he was looking right at her with eyes that held no love, only a terrifying, clinical precision. There are stories that comfort us, and then there are stories like this, about the scars we hide under silk dresses and the past that refuse to stay buried. If you want to see what happens when the one person you destroyed holds your future in his hands, stay with me. The air in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton smelled of expensive perfume, stale ambition, and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. Dr. Elena Vance adjusted the strap of her emerald silk gown, her reflection caught in the darkened window overlooking downtown Chicago. She looked perfect. She always made sure she looked perfect. At 34, she was the youngest attending vascular surgeon at St. Jude's Medical Center, and tonight she was poised to ascend even higher. "Stop checking your reflection, Elle. You look lethal," Mark whispered, stepping up beside her. Mark was safe. Mark was a dermatologist with a steady income, a lake house in Michigan, and absolutely no complex emotional baggage. He was the anti-chaos. "I'm not checking my reflection," Elena lied, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her hip. "I'm looking for the board chairman. If the rumors are true, they're announcing the new head of surgery tonight." "And you think it's you?" "I know my numbers, Mark. My mortality rate is the lowest in the department. I bring in the most grant money. Logically, there is no other choice." She took a sip of champagne, the bubbles crisp against her tongue. She felt secure. The world was a grid, and she knew how to navigate it. She had trimmed away the dead weight in her life years ago, surgically excising anything that slowed her down. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The hum of 300 wealthy donors and doctors died down to a respectful hush. Dr. Silas Vance, no relation, though Elena often joked he was her work father, stepped up to the podium. The spotlight hit his silver hair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas began, his voice booming, "St. Jude's has always been a beacon of innovation. We heal the impossible. To lead us into the next decade, we needed a visionary, a surgeon who understands that to heal the body, one must first master the will to survive." Elena set her glass down on a high-top table. She held her breath, preparing her humble surprise face. "We searched globally," Silas continued, "and we found him in Zurich, though he is a son of Chicago. Please welcome our new chief of surgery, Dr. Lucas Thorne." The applause started politely, then grew confused as whispers rippled through the room. Elena didn't clap. Her hands had turned to ice. The blood drained from her face so fast that the room tilted dangerously to the left. Lucas, no, it wasn't possible. Lucas was a memory of vomit basins and darkened bedrooms. Lucas was a skeleton of a man shivering under 3 blankets in July. Lucas was the sickness she had escaped to save herself. But the man walking up the stairs to the stage was not a skeleton. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther. The tuxedo fit him as if it were armor. His shoulders were broad, filling out the black wool in a way the Lucas she knew never could have. His hair, once thinning from stress and malnutrition, was thick, dark, and swept back. He reached the podium and shook Silas's hand. The grip looked firm, strong. "Thank you," Lucas said. His voice, it was the same baritone, but the timbre had changed. The desperate, pleading edge she remembered from their last night together. "Elena, please, I just need a glass of water. Please don't go out tonight," was gone. In its place was a cold, resonant authority. "Medicine is not just about skill," Lucas told the room, his eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't use notes. "It is about endurance. It is about the refusal to accept the limits others place on you." Elena felt like she was underwater. The sounds of the gala were muffled. She couldn't look away. He was alive. Not just alive, but magnificent, and he was her boss. "He's intense," Mark whispered, oblivious to the fact that his girlfriend was having a panic attack. "Do you know him?" Elena's throat clicked dry. "I knew him, a long time ago." As if he heard her, Lucas stopped scanning the room. His gaze locked onto her. Across 50 feet of crowded ballroom, their eyes met. Elena expected anger. She expected the burning fire of a scorned husband. She braced herself for a glare that would strip the skin from her bones. But Lucas didn't glare. He didn't frown. He simply looked at her. His expression was a terrifying void. It was the look a surgeon gives an interesting tumor before cutting it out. Clinical, detached, zero pulse. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, an eternity, and then, with agonizing slowness, he looked away, continuing his speech as if she were nothing more than a pillar in the room. "I look forward to working with all of you," Lucas finished. The applause thundered this time. Elena grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. "I need air," she choked out. She turned and fled toward the terrace doors, the silk of her dress rustling like dry leaves. She pushed out into the biting Chicago winter night, the cold wind hitting her flushed face. She gasped, trying to fill her lungs, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was supposed to be dead. Or at least he was supposed to be gone. Broken. "It's a cold night for thin silk, Dr. Vance." The voice came from the shadows to her right. Elena spun around. Lucas was leaning against the stone balustrade, a lit cigarette in his hand. He hadn't been smoking on stage. He must have followed her out immediately, moving with that impossible, silent speed. He took a drag, the cherry of the cigarette glowing bright orange, illuminating the sharp angles of his jaw. He exhaled a plume of smoke that mixed with the steam of his breath. "Lucas," she whispered. The name tasted like ash. "Dr. Thorne," he corrected softly. He didn't move toward her. He stayed in the dark. Human resources is very strict about informalities between superiors and subordinates. She took a step back, trembling. "You were sick. You thought I died?" Lucas tilted his head, studying her shivering form. "Wishful thinking, Elena, or just convenient?" "I didn't think you died," she lied, her voice shaking. I didn't think you'd come back." "I didn't come back for you," he said, flicking the ash over the railing. The dismissal was casual, brutal. "I came back because St. Jude's has the best cardiothoracic unit in the Midwest, and I intend to make it the best in the world. You just happen to be part of the inventory." He pushed off the railing and walked toward the door, passing within inches of her. He smelled of expensive tobacco and cold rain. He didn't smell like medicine. He didn't smell like sickness. He paused with his hand on the door handle. "Make sure you're at rounds by 0600, Dr. Vance," he said, not looking back at her. "I don't tolerate lateness, and I certainly don't tolerate weakness." The door clicked, shut behind him. Elena stood alone on the balcony, the city lights blurring through the tears she refused to let fall. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't the surgeon holding the scalpel. She was the patient on the table, and he had just made the first incision. The hospital at 6:02 a.m. was a different world than the champagne-soaked ballroom of the previous night. Under the unforgiving fluorescent hum of the vascular wing, there were no shadows to hide in. Everything was white, chrome, and terrifyingly exposed. Dr. Elena Vance stood at the central nurse's station, her posture rigid. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glowing cherry of Lucas's cigarette and the flat, dead look in his eyes. She had arrived an hour early, reviewing every chart, memorizing every lab value, armoring herself with data. She would not give him an inch. "Dr. Vance," a first-year resident, Hopkins whispered. "He's here." The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open with a soft chime. Lucas stepped out. He wasn't wearing the standard-issue white coat. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection, with a pristine white coat carried casually over one arm. He looked rested. He looked like he owned the building. "Good morning," Lucas said. His voice was not loud, yet it carried down the entire corridor, silencing the chatter of nurses and the squeak of cartwheels. "Good morning, Dr. Thorne," the group of residents chorused, a little too eager, a little too frightened. Elena straightened her spine. "We're ready for rounds, doctor. We'll start with the VIP suite. Mr. Sterling, the senator's brother." Lucas stopped in front of her. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply gestured for her to lead the way. Proceed. They moved as a pack to room 402. Elena took her position at the foot of the bed, feeling the weight of the resident's eyes on her. This was her stage. She knew this patient inside and out. Mr. Sterling presents with a symptomatic juxtarenal abdominal aortic aneurysm, measuring 6.2 centimeters. Elena began, her voice steady, professional. He has significant comorbidities, including hypertension and stage 3 CKD. Given the renal involvement, my plan is an open repair with a suprarenal clamp. We're scheduled for the OR at 10 a.m. She finished and looked at Lucas, expecting a nod of approval. It was the textbook play. Safe, reliable, gold standard for years. Lucas walked to the light box where the CT angiogram was displayed. He stared at the monochrome slices of the patient's torso for a long moment. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. A nurse shifted her way and Hopkins coughed into his fist. Open repair, Lucas repeated, not turning around. So you intend to cross-clamp the aorta above the renal arteries on a man with stage 3 kidney failure? It's the only way to ensure a seal, given the short neck of the aneurysm, Elena defended, her grip tightening on her tablet. I'm aware of the renal risks, but we'll use cold perfusion to protect the kidneys. Lucas turned slowly. Cold perfusion mitigates damage, Dr. Vance. It doesn't prevent it. You're looking at a 30% chance of pushing him into dialysis for the rest of his life. Is that what we call a success in this department? Heat crept up Elena's neck. The anatomy is too complex for a standard stent. An endovascular approach isn't feasible. Not for a standard stent, no, Lucas agreed. He walked over to the residents, bypassing Elena entirely. He looked at Hopkins. Dr. Hopkins, explain to me why Dr. Vance believes an endovascular approach is impossible. Hopkins stammered. The aneurysm extends too close to the renal arteries. There is no landing zone for the graft. Correct, Lucas said. In 2018, that would have been a sufficient answer. He tapped the screen, zooming in on the 3D reconstruction. However, I noticed we have a supply of the new fenestrated grafts from the Zurich trial in the storage lab. Custom-made ports. We can stent this aneurysm without opening his chest, preserving the renal flow completely. Recovery time drops from 6 weeks to 3 days. Dialysis risk drops to near zero. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. We don't have the protocols set up for fenestrated grafts yet. I haven't been certified on that specific device. I have, Lucas said simply. He looked at the head nurse. Cancel the open repair. Prep the hybrid suite. I'll perform the fenestrated EVAR myself. Dr. Vance can assist. The heir left the room, to be demoted from a lead surgeon to assistant on her own patient, in front of her own team, was a surgical strike to her ego. Dr. Thorne, Elena said, her voice dropping to a hiss, this is my patient. You can't just hijack the case. Lucas looked at her then. There was no malice in his face, which made it worse. There was only poor deficiency. I'm not hijacking the case, Dr. Vance. I'm saving the patient's kidneys. Do you care more about your name on the surgical board or the quality of life of the man in that bed? It was a trap. If she argued, she was selfish. If she agreed, she was incompetent. I care about the patient, she whispered, the lie burning her tongue. She cared about the patient, yes, but she also cared that Lucas was stripping her naked in front of an audience. Good, Lucas said. He checked his watch. Scrub in at 0930, don't be late. He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, the residents scrambling to follow him like ducklings finding a new mother. Elena was left standing alone at the foot of Mr. Sterling's bed. The monitor beeped rhythmically, mocking her. She looked at the CT scan on the wall, the image she had studied for hours, the problem she thought she had solved. Lucas had glanced at it for 10 seconds and found a better way. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling again. She shoved them into her lab coat pockets, fighting the urge to scream. He wasn't just back to be the boss. He was back to prove that she was obsolete. The scrub room was a purgatory of stainless steel and silence. It was the airlock between the chaotic world outside and the sterile sanctuary of the operating room. Elena stood at the sink, the water running hot over her hands. The protocol was muscle memory. 5 minutes of scrubbing, fingertips to elbows. The stiff bristles of the brush scraped against her skin, turning it raw and pink. She focused on the sensation, using the pain to ground herself. Next to her, Lucas was doing the same. The proximity was suffocating. In the tight space, she could feel the heat radiating from him. He had rolled the sleeves of his blue scrubs high, exposing his forearms. Elena couldn't help herself. Her eyes darted to the side, scanning him. She was looking for the tremor. 5 years ago, Lucas couldn't hold a coffee cup without spilling it. The autoimmune disorder had eaten his nervous system alive. She remembered the sound of porcelain shattering in their kitchen, the way he had looked at her, humiliated, apologies spilling from his cracked lips, while she just stood there, staring at the brown stains spreading on the floor, thinking, I can't do this. I didn't sign up for this. She looked at his hands now. They were steady as stone. The water cascaded over thick veins and corded muscle. The skin was tanned and healthy, not the translucent, paper-thin gray she remembered. You're staring, Darvances. Lucas didn't turn his head. He was looking straight into the mirror above the sink, watching her watch him. Elena flinched, quickly refocusing on her own hands. I'm just checking the clock. We're on a tight schedule. You were looking for the Pieck line scars, Lucas said. His voice was devoid of emotion, stating a fact like a diagnosis. Or maybe you were checking to see if my ribs are still visible through the scrub top. The water turned off with a sharp thud as he hit the knee pedal. Elena froze. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the hum of the ventilation system. I wasn't, she started, but the lie died in her throat. Suddenly the memory washed over her, visceral and violent. The bathroom, 5 years ago. The smell of bleach trying to mask the smell of sickness. Lucas slumped against the toilet, too weak to stand, his body a cage of bones. He had reached out a hand to her, begging for help to get back to bed. And she had hesitated. She had hesitated because the touch of his clammy skin made her skin crawl. She had looked at her husband and felt not love, not pity, but revulsion. That was the moment she knew she would leave. The day she decided she deserved better than a dying anchor. It's okay, Lucas said softly. He turned to face her, water dripping from his elbows. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of antiseptic soap, but beneath it, there was the scent of a living, healthy man. You won't find him, Elena, he said. The man you left, the one who needed you to carry him to the bathroom. He died in that apartment. He held up his hands, palms open, displaying them to her. They were large, capable, and terrifyingly strong. I buried him, Lucas whispered, and I made sure the man who crawled out of the grave didn't need anyone to carry him ever again. Elena felt a sting of tears behind her mask, hot and sudden. Guilt, sharp as a scalpel, sliced through her chest. It wasn't just that he was alive. It was that he had survived despite her. Her absence hadn't killed him. It had forged him. Lucas, she stammered, her composure fracturing. I was young, I was scared. We were both scared, he cut her off. The softness vanished, replaced by the steel wall. The difference is, I stayed in the fight. You took a cab to the Four Seasons. He grabbed a sterile towel, drying his arms with efficient, rough motions. He didn't look at her again. The moment of vulnerability was gone, sealed up tight. Get your head in the game, Darvance, he commanded, his voice shifting back to the impersonal tone of the chief of surgery. Mr. Sterling is on the table. If you hesitate in there like you did just now, I will remove you from the field. Do you understand? Elena nodded, unable to speak. Good. He backed through the swinging doors into the operating room, disappearing, into the bright white light. Elena stood alone at the sink for 5 more seconds, gripping the edge of the metal basin until her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, pushing the image of the sick, broken mutt out of her mind. He was gone. The monster in the other room was something else entirely. She hit the knee pedal, let the water run for one last second, and followed him into the light. The surgery had been a masterpiece. A flawless, bloodless ballet that saved a man's kidneys and humiliated Elena in the process. She had stood there, cutting sutures and holding retractors, reduced to the role of a glorified medical student, while Lucas orchestrated the room with terrifying ease. Now, 4 hours later, The adrenaline had faded into a dull, throbbing headache. Elena pushed open the heavy glass door of the Daily Grind, a coffee shop across the street from St. Jude's. The blast of warm air smelled of roasted beans and wet wool. It was a sanctuary for the hospital staff, a place where titles were left at the door and caffeine was the only god. She spotted him immediately. Lucas was sitting at a small table in the back corner, a black espresso in front of him. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading a medical journal. He was simply staring out the window at the gray slush of the Chicago street, completely still. Elena hesitated. Her instinct was to run, but the anger, the defensive, hot indignation of being embarrassed in her own OR propelled her forward. She marched to his table. "We need to talk," she said. Lucas didn't jump. He turned his head slowly, his eyes landing on her with that same maddening, glassy detachment. "Dr. Vance," he said, "if this is about the post-op orders for Mr. Sterling, I've already entered them." "It's not about the orders, Lucas. Stop it." She pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down uninvited. "Stop acting like we're strangers. Stop acting like you didn't spend 7 years of your life with me." He took a sip of his espresso. "I'm not acting, Elena. I'm working. Something you should be doing, considering your shift doesn't end for another 2 hours. I took a break to talk to you." She leaned in, lowering her voice, though the shop was noisy enough to cover them. "You humiliated me in there today. You made me look incompetent in front of my residents. Is this your plan? Revenge? You're going to bully me until I quit?" Lucas set the cup down. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. "You think too highly of yourself," he said softly. "I didn't correct you to hurt your feelings. I corrected you because you were wrong. You were prioritizing your comfort zone over the patient's outcome. That's not bullying, that's teaching." "I'm not a student," Elena snapped, her voice rising. A nurse at a nearby table glanced over. Elena lowered her tone again, hissing, "I am an attending surgeon. I deserved a heads up before you changed the entire surgical plan." "You deserve what you earn," Lucas countered, "and today you earned a lesson." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He slid it across the scuffed wooden table toward her. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the paper warily. "The new attending call schedule for the next quarter. I finalized it this morning." Elena unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the grid, searching for her name. As she read, her stomach dropped. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving weekend, every Friday night for the next 2 months. "This?" She looked up aghast. "This is impossible. You have me covering every major holiday. You have me on weekends for 8 weeks straight." "We're short-staffed," Lucas said, his voice smooth as silk. "And as the junior attending in terms of tenure under the new administration, you're the logical choice to fill the gaps. Unless, of course, you have a family waiting for you at home." The question hung in the air, cruel and precise. He knew she didn't. He knew she had left him to be with Mark. But he also knew Mark was a dermatologist who hated drama and spent his holidays skiing in Aspen. This schedule would destroy her relationship. It would isolate her completely. "You're doing this on purpose," she whispered. "This isn't about staffing. This is because I left." Lucas leaned forward. For the first time, the ice in his eyes cracked, revealing a glimpse of the scorching heat beneath. "You didn't just leave, Elena. You vanished. You left a note on the kitchen counter next to my pill bottles." He paused, letting the memories settle between them. "But you're right. This isn't because you left. I don't care that you left. I care that you're a surgeon who has grown lazy and entitled. You want the title? You want the prestige? Then you will work for it." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Enjoy the coffee. You're going to need the caffeine. You're on call tonight." He didn't wait for a response. He walked out of the shop, stepping into the biting wind without flinching. Elena stared at the schedule in her hands. The dates blurred together. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't screaming. He was simply erasing her life, one shift at a time, with the calm precision of a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. She crumpled the paper in her fist, the sound of the crinkling paper loud in the suddenly quiet corner. She was trapped in the cage he had built, And the terrifying part was he had the keys, and he had absolutely no intention of letting her out. The cursor on the screen blinked like a rhythmic taunt. Blink, blink, blink. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The vascular wing was quiet, save for the distant buffer polishing the linoleum floors. Elena sat in the darkened charting room, surrounded by 3 empty cups of coffee and a towering stack of patient files. She wasn't charting, she was auditing. For the past week, she had reviewed every single order Dr. Lucas Thorne had entered into the electronic health record system. Every prescription, every dosage adjustment, every surgical note. She was looking for the trap, the subtle, medically plausible error he would plant under her name to trigger a malpractice suit. He increased the heparin drip to 18 units, she muttered to herself, her eyes burning. Why, the PTT is stable. Is he trying to cause a bleed? Is he trying to pin a hemorrhage on me? She pulled up the latest lab results, her vision blurring slightly. No, the patient's weight had increased due to fluid retention. The dosage adjustment was mathematically perfect. He wasn't setting her up. He was just being right. Again. Dr. Vance? Elena jumped, her knee knocking loudly against the desk. A night nurse, Brenda, stood in the doorway holding a clipboard. Brenda had worked at St. Jude's for 20 years. She had seen Elena as a resident, and she had seen Lucas when he was sick. Her expression was pitying, which was worse than judgment. You missed the rounds on bed 6, Brenda said softly. Mrs. Kovac keeps asking when you're coming to check her incision. It's been 4 hours. Elena rubbed her temples. I was double-checking the chief's orders on the VIP case. I wanted to be thorough. The chief went home at 5, Brenda said, and Mrs. Kovac is crying because she thinks something is wrong. You need to go see her, Elena. You're chasing ghosts. Elena stood up, a wave of dizziness washing over her. She grabbed her stethoscope. I'm not chasing ghosts, Brenda. I'm protecting my license. But when she walked down the hall, she swayed. She checked Mrs. Kovac, apologized with a plastic smile, and finally clocked out at midnight, 6 hours after her shift was supposed to end. By the time she unlocked the door to her penthouse apartment in the Gold Coast, her bones felt like they were made of lead. The apartment was dark, but the blue light of the television flickered in the living room. Mark was on the couch, still in his work clothes, staring at a mute CNN broadcast. A half-eaten container of Thai takeout sat on the coffee table. Cold. You said you'd be home for dinner, Mark said without looking away from the screen. I had to stay, Elena said, dropping her bag on the floor. Lucas, Dr. Thorne posted a complex case schedule. I had to verify the prep protocols. Mark turned off the TV. The silence in the room was sudden and deafening. He looked at her, and for the first time, Elena noticed how tired he looked. Not the physical exhaustion she felt, but an emotional weariness. It's always him, Mark said quietly. For 2 weeks, every sentence out of your mouth starts with Lucas or the chief or he. You're obsessed, Elle. I am not obsessed, Elena snapped, the defensive reflex immediate. He is trying to destroy my career, Mark. You don't understand. You're a dermatologist. If you make a mistake, someone gets a rash. If I make a mistake, someone dies. He's waiting for me to slip up. He doesn't have to wait, Mark said, standing up. You're slipping up all on your own. You're a wreck. You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. You look, he paused, searching for the word. You look haunted. I am under a lot of pressure. No, Mark shook his head. You're guilty. That's what this is. You feel guilty about what you did to him 5 years ago, and now that he's back and successful, you can't handle it. You want him to be the villain so you don't have to be. The truth of his words hit her like a physical slap. Elena recoiled, stepping back toward the door. That's not fair. I did what I had to do. I couldn't survive him back then. And I can't survive this, Mark said. He walked past her into the bedroom and came out a moment later with a gym bag. I'm going to the lake house for a few days. I need to sleep without hearing you pacing the floor at 3 a.m. checking your email. Mark, don't, please. Elena reached for his arm, but her hands stopped in midair. She didn't have the energy to fight for him. Fix it, Elena, Mark said, opening the front door. Fix whatever is happening between you and him. Because right now there are 3 people in this relationship, And I'm the third wheel. The door clicked shut. Elena stood alone in the dark, expensive silence of the apartment she had bought to prove she had made it. She looked at her phone, no messages, no missed calls, just a notification from the hospital app. Dr. Thorne has updated the surgical roster for tomorrow. She sank onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Lucas hadn't planted a single trap. He hadn't sabotaged a single file. He didn't have to. He had simply handed her a rope, and she was busy tying the noose around her own neck. The dinner party was held in the Mitchell's brownstone in Lincoln Park. It was the kind of home that smelled of old money, beeswax, and roasting rosemary. Before the divorce, this had been their circle. Elena and Lucas, the golden couple, the promising resident and the brilliant intern. Tonight, Elena walked in alone. She handed her coat to the housekeeper, feeling the phantom weight of Mark's absence by her side. She had told the host, Dr. Robert Mitchell, that Mark had a family emergency. The lie tasted like sour wine. "Elena, you look stunning," Robert boomed, handing her a glass of Cabernet before she had even fully entered the living room. "Thank you, Robert." She took the glass, gripping the stem tightly. The room was warm, filled with soft jazz and the murmurs of 6 or 7 high-ranking physicians. She felt safe here. These were her people. They knew the history. They knew how hard she had worked while Lucas was sick. Surely they understood why she had left. Then the doorbell rang. The conversation lulled. Elena turned toward the archway, expecting Lucas to walk in alone, perhaps looking solemn or work-weary. Lucas walked in. He was wearing a navy blazer over a cashmere sweater, looking less like a shark and more like a man at ease. But he wasn't alone. His hand rested lightly on the small of a woman's back. She was petite, with soft, shoulder-length brown hair and a dress that was simple, modest, and completely unpretentious. She wasn't a doctor. Elena could tell immediately. She lacked the sharp, predatory gaze of a surgeon. She looked kind. "Everyone," Lucas said, his voice warm in a way Elena hadn't heard in years. "This is Sarah. She runs the pediatric literacy program at the library." Sarah smiled, a genuine crinkling eye smile that lit up the room. "It's so lovely to meet you all. Lucas speaks so highly of his colleagues." Elena felt the wine turn to acid in her stomach. "Lucas speaks. Since when?" The introductions were made. When they reached Elena, the air in the room grew thin. "Elena," Lucas said, nodding politely. "Dr. Vance," Sarah said, extending a hand. "Lucas mentioned you're a vascular surgeon. That must be incredibly intense work." "It requires a certain fortitude," Elena said, taking the hand. It was soft, warm. "Not everyone is cut out for the reality of it." Sarah didn't flinch at the coldness. She just smiled again. "I can imagine." Dinner was an exercise in torture. Elena was seated across from them. She watched Lucas pull out Sarah's chair. She watched him refill her water glass. She watched the way he listened to her talk about children's books with an attentiveness he used to save for medical journals. He looked happy, not triumphant, not vengeful, just happy. It was unbearable. Elena finished her third glass of wine as the main course was cleared. The conversation had drifted to the topic of loyalty in the medical profession, staying with a hospital through budget cuts. "It's about commitment," Robert Mitchell said, "sticking it out when things get ugly." Elena laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that cut through the chatter. "Commitment is a tricky word, isn't it?" she said, swirling the dregs of her wine. Her eyes locked on Lucas. "Sometimes leaving is the only way to survive. You can't let someone else's drowning pull you under. Right, Lucas?" The table went dead silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Sarah looked down at her plate, sensing the sudden violence in the air. Lucas slowly wiped his mouth with his linen napkin and placed it on the table. He looked at Elena, his expression unreadable. "Is that how you remember it, Elena?" he asked quietly. "Drowning?" "You were sick, Lucas," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was 29. I had a career. I wasn't a nursemaid. I did what I had to do to save my own life." "You did," Lucas agreed. He reached out and took Sarah's hand, resting it on the tablecloth. "And I don't blame you for that. Survival is a powerful instinct." He paused, his gaze drifting over Elena's empty wine glass, her rigid posture, the empty chair beside her, where Mark should have been. But there is a difference between surviving and living, he continued, his voice soft but devastating. I spent 5 years learning how to live again. Looking at you tonight, Elena, I'm not sure you ever started. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't an insult, it was a diagnosis. And everyone at the table knew it was accurate. Elena opened her mouth to retort, to defend herself, but nothing came out. She was the successful surgeon in the designer dress, and he was the man who had rebuilt himself from ash. And in that warm, candlelit room, holding the hand of a school librarian, he looked richer than she had ever been. Anyone for coffee? Robert asked loudly, desperate to break the tension. Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I have an early surgery, she muttered. Excuse me. She fled the dining room, grabbing her coat and rushing out into the cold night. As she waited for her Uber on the sidewalk, she looked back at the window. She could see Lucas laughing at something Sarah whispered to him. He didn't look toward the door. He didn't check to see if she was okay. He had meant what he said. He wasn't angry. He was just done. The emergency room consult came in at 2:00 p.m. on a rainy Thursday. The pager on Elena's hip buzzed with a priority code. Vascular consult. Male, 26. Ischemic limb. Possible necrotizing vasculitis. Elena took the elevator down, grateful for the distraction. Since the dinner party, the air in the department had been thick with unspoken tension. She needed a simple case. A clot. A blockage. Something she could cut out and fix. But when she pulled back the curtain of Trauma Bay 4, the world stopped spinning. The patient, Leo, was shivering violently on the gurney. He was young, pale, and drenched in a cold sweat. But it was the woman sitting beside him that froze Elena's blood. She couldn't have been more than 25, clutching Leo's hand with a desperation that turned her knuckles white. She looked terrified, exhausted, and completely overwhelmed. It was a mirror image of 5 years ago. Javance Vascular? Elena announced, her voice sounding tinny and far away. His legs, the ER attending said, pointing to the exposed lower limbs. Look at the modeling. Elena stepped closer. The skin on Leo's shins was covered in a web of angry purple blotches, levato reticularis. It was the hallmark of the immune system attacking the blood vessels. The smell of the room, metallic blood, antiseptic, and the sour scent of fear hit her like a physical blow. Flashbacks assaulted her, Lucas curling up on the bathroom tiles, the rash spreading across his chest, the way he looked at her, begging for water, and the way she had recoiled. It hurts, Leo groaned, his teeth chattering. It feels like my bones are burning. Elena took a step back. The walls of the trauma bay seemed to be closing in. We need a CT angiogram, Elena stammered, and start high-dose steroids. But if the tissue is necrotic, we might need to amputate the toes. The young wife let out a sob. Amputate? He's a runner. You can't take his feet. I'm trying to save his life, Elena said, her tone sharper than she intended. She was hiding behind the brutality of the medicine. If the infection spreads, the infection isn't the primary enemy right now. The inflammation is. The curtain swept back. Lucas walked in. He didn't look at Elena. He walked straight to the side of the bed. He didn't pick up the chart. Instead, he placed a hand gently on Leo's shoulder. Leo, Lucas said softly. I'm Dr. Thorne. I know it feels like your body's on fire right now. I know the pain is making it hard to think. Leo stopped thrashing. He looked up at Lucas, eyes wide and glassy. Make it stop, please. We will, Lucas promised. He looked at the legs, not with the detached gaze of a surgeon, but with a grim recognition. He touched the purple rash with his bare hand, checking the temperature. It's polyarteritis nodosa, Lucas said, diagnosing it without a scan. I've seen this presentation before. We still need the angio to confirm, Elena interjected, needing to assert control. Protocol requires us to stabilize the patient's fear so his heart rate doesn't spike and blow a vessel. Lucas corrected her, his voice low. He turned to the young wife. He pulled a stool over and sat down so he was lower than her, looking up. What is your name? He asked. Maya, she whispered. Maya, Lucas said, intense and gentle. This is the scariest moment of your life. You are looking at him and you don't recognize the man you married. You're wondering if this is going to be your future forever, taking care of a sick man. Elena felt the color drain from her face. He was speaking to the girl, but he was cutting Elena open. Maya choked up. I don't know what to do. You don't have to do anything right now, except hold his hand, Lucas said. He needs to know you aren't going to leave. That's the medicine he needs most. The drugs we give him won't work if he thinks he's fighting alone. Maya nodded, gripping Leo's hand tighter, pressing a kiss to his feverish forehead. Lucas stood up and finally looked at Elena. His eyes were dark, filled with a sorrow she couldn't comprehend. Admit him to the ICU, Lucas ordered quietly. Start the pulse steroids and cyclophosphamide. No surgery yet. We give his body a chance to fight. And if he crashes, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. Then we deal with it, Lucas said. But we don't cut him apart just because we're afraid of what we see. He walked past her, brushing her arm. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. Elena stood paralyzed in the trauma bay. She watched Maya wiping the sweat from Leo's brow, whispering words of comfort. She saw the love there, terrified, messy, but absolute. She realized then, with a sick, sinking feeling, that she had never looked at Lucas like that. When he was sick, she hadn't seen a husband in pain. She had seen a burden. And Lucas, standing there just now, had shown more compassion to a stranger in 5 minutes than she had shown him in 2 years of marriage. She turned and walked out of the ER, her heels clicking loudly on the tile, fleeing from the reflection in the mirror she couldn't bear to see. The administrative wing of St. Jude's at 11 o'clock p.m. was a tomb of glass and polished mahogany. The cleaning crews had already passed through, leaving the air smelling of lemon pledge and emptiness. Daughter Elena Vance sat at her desk, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her laptop screen. The cursor blinked at the end of a sentence she had been trying to finish for an hour. It was a grant proposal for vascular research, a prestigious multi-million-dollar funding request that usually made her feel powerful. Tonight, the words looked like nonsense. Her door was ajar. She heard footsteps, slow, rhythmic, heavy. They stopped. You're still here, a voice said. Elena looked up. Lucas stood in the doorway. He had shedded his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up. He held a stack of files under his arm. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes stark against the harsh hallway light. I need to finish the methodology section for the NIH grant, Elena said, rubbing her neck. Deadline is Friday. The deadline was extended to Monday, Lucas said, walking into the room. He placed a file on the edge of her desk. I signed off on the extension this morning. You didn't check your email. Elena faltered. She hadn't checked her email. She had been staring at the wall, replaying the scene in the ER with the young couple, Maya and Leo. I've been distracted. Lucas didn't comment. He moved to the small table by the window where the departmental printer sat, sorting through the papers he had brought. For a long minute, the only sound was the rustle of paper and the distant wail of a siren on the Kennedy Expressway. The silence wasn't the hostile, charged silence of the operating room. It was something heavier. It was the silence of two people who used to share a bed, now sharing nothing but a zip code. Elena watched his back, the way his shoulder blades moved beneath the cotton shirt. He was real. He was here. And she felt a desperate, clawing need to break the glass wall between them. Lucas, she said. He paused, a page halfway turned. Dr. Vance? Stop it, she whispered. Just for a minute. Can you stop being the chief? Can you just be... Be what? He turned around, leaning against the printer table. The man you knew? He's gone, Elena. We established that. I need to know, she blurted it out. The words came up like bile burning her throat. Do you hate me? She held her breath. She wanted him to say yes. She wanted him to scream at her, to tell her she was a monster, a coward, a traitor. Anger she could handle. Anger was heat. Anger meant he still felt something. Lucas looked at her. His expression was maddeningly calm. He crossed his arms over his chest, studying her like a puzzle he had already solved. Hate takes a lot of energy, Elena, he said softly. I left you to die, she pushed, her voice cracking. I walked out when you were vomiting blood. I filed for divorce while you were in a clinic in Zurich. You have to hate me. It's the only thing that makes sense. Lucas sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of his lungs. He walked over to her desk and sat on the edge of it, looking down at her. When you left, he began, his voice low and steady, I didn't have the luxury of hating you. I was drowning. Literally. My lungs were filling with fluid faster than I could clear them. Every breath was a negotiation with my own body. He tapped his chest lightly. When you're fighting for oxygen, Elena, you don't think about your wife. You don't think about betrayal. You don't think about marriage vows. You think about air. Just air. You became background noise. A static channel I turned off so I could focus on staying alive. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, hot and humiliating. So I was nothing? I was just noise, Vio. You were a complication, Lucas said, and I had to eliminate complications. Hating you would have required me to care about what you did, and I couldn't afford to care. I had to become cold to survive the fever, and once the fever broke, he shrugged, the cold stayed. He stood up, picking up his files. I don't hate you, Elena. I don't feel anything for you at all. You're just a vascular surgeon in my department, and right now you're a tired surgeon who is going to make mistakes if she doesn't go home. He walked to the door. Go home, Elena. There's nothing for you here tonight. He disappeared into the hallway, his footsteps fading away toward the elevators. Elena sat frozen in her chair. The rejection was total. It was absolute. Hate would have been a tether, a connection binding them together in mutual misery. But indifference was an abyss. She looked at the grant proposal on her screen, Methodology for Vascular Preservation. She closed the laptop with a snap. The office plunged into darkness. She was alone in the dark, and for the first time she realized that no amount of success, no title, and no apology would ever fill the space where Lucas used to be. He hadn't just moved on, he had ascended to a place where she simply didn't exist. The weather in Chicago turned at 3:00 a.m. The rain that had been falling all evening hit a pocket of Arctic air and instantly froze, turning the I-90 Kennedy Expressway into a sheet of black ice. Lena was dozing in the on-call room, her head resting on a stack of journals, when the sound tore through the silence. It wasn't a pager, it was the overhead PA system, a 3-tone chime that signaled catastrophe. Code Black, external disaster. Mass casualty incident. All attending staff to the ER immediately. Code Black. Elena was on her feet before the second chime finished. The lethargy of her depression vanished, replaced by the sharp, cold clarity of adrenaline. She grabbed her white coat and sprinted for the stairwell. When she burst through the double doors of the emergency department, the scene was a tableau of controlled hell. 30 minutes ago, this had been a quiet night. Now every bay was full. Stretchers lined the hallways. Paramedics were shouting vitals over the screams of patients. The air smelled of wet asphalt, diesel fuel, and the copper tang of fresh blood. In the center of the storm stood Lucas. He had abandoned his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, his tie gone. He stood at the triage desk, holding a radio in one hand and a chart in the other. He wasn't shouting, he was conducting. Bay 1 and 2, surgical airway needed, Lucas ordered, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. Dr. Patel, take the thoracotomy in Bay 4. Ortho, I need you in the hallway for the fractures. Move. He spotted Elena emerging from the stairwell. He didn't wave. He pointed a finger directly at her, then at the ambulance bay doors. Vascular, he called. Incoming. Bay 1, now. Elena didn't ask questions. She ran to Trauma Bay 1 just as the doors flew open. A team of paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney with frantic urgency. On it lay a man in a torn police uniform, his chest heaving, his face a mask of gray shock. Officer Miller, 34 years old, the paramedic yelled, breathless. Driver side impact, pinned for 20 minutes. BP is 70/40 and dropping. Heart rate 130. His pulses in the legs are gone. Get him over, Elena commanded. They transferred the heavy officer onto the trauma bed. Elena moved instantly, her hands flying over his body. She felt for a femoral pulse. Nothing. She felt his abdomen. Rigid. I need a portable chest and pelvis. Stat, she shouted. Hang 2 units of O negative on the rapid infuser. Dr. Vance, a resident stammered, looking at the monitor. He's crashing. Pressure is 50 systolic. He's bleeding out, Elena said, her mind racing through the anatomy. No leg pulses, massive chest trauma, hypotension. It's an aortic transection, a voice said from behind her. Lucas was there. He had materialized at the head of the bed, looking at the portable X-ray that had just popped up on the monitor. The mediastinum, the center of the chest, was widened terrifyingly. The great vessel carrying blood from the heart had torn. His aorta is hanging by a thread, Lucas said. If we don't clamp it in 2 minutes, he's dead. We can't get him to the hybrid room in time, Elena said, looking at the chaos in the hallway. The elevators are gridlocked. Lucas looked at her. For the first time all night, the chief mask slipped and she saw the surgeon, the partner she used to know. Then we open him here, Lucas said. Emergency thoracotomy. Crack the chest, cross-clamp the aorta, then we run. It was a cowboy move. It was dangerous, bloody, and desperate. It was exactly the kind of medicine Lucas used to love before he got sick. I'm ready, Elena said, grabbing a scalpel from the tray. On my count, Lucas said, positioning himself on the left side of the patient. I'll expose. You clamp. Do not miss, Elena. You get 1 shot. I won't miss, she said. The noise of the ER faded away. The screaming patients, the shouting nurses, the ringing phones, it all became white noise. The world narrowed down to the square of iodine-stained skin on the officer's chest. Lucas looked at her across the body. His eyes were locked on hers. Go, he said. Elena watched his hands move. Fast, sure, violent. He made the incision, his hands diving into the bloody cavity of the chest, pushing aside the lung to find the source of the catastrophe. I can feel it, Lucas grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. It's ruptured. I need the clamp. Now, Elena. She didn't hesitate. She reached into the open chest of the dying man, her gloved hand brushing against Lucas's. In that slick, hot darkness, their fingers met. She felt the rhythm of his movement, the intent of his muscle. She guided the vascular clamp down, blind, trusting his guidance, trusting her instinct. Click. The ratchet of the clamp locked. They both froze, watching the monitor. The flat line whined for a second, then beep, beep, beep. The blood pressure started to tick up, 60, 70, 80. Lucas exhaled a sharp hiss of breath. He looked up at her, blood spattered across his white shirt, his eyes wild and alive. We got him, he whispered. Now get him upstairs before the clamp slips. They grabbed the rails of the bed together as they sprinted down the hallway toward the elevators, pushing the dying man between them. Elena felt a surge of electricity that had nothing to do with medicine. They were a single organism again. The machinery of their marriage, broken and rusted for 5 years, had just roared back to life, fueled by blood and adrenaline. The transition from the blood-slicked chaos of the ER to the sterile sanctuary of Operating Room 1 was jarring. The noise vanished, replaced by the rhythmic whoosh-click of the ventilator and the steady hum of the bypass machine. Officer Miller's chest was open, a cavern of red ribs, spreaders, and white gauze. Lucas stood across from Elena. They were both gowned and gloved, their faces hidden behind masks and protective eyewear. Only their eyes were visible. And in this room, under the blinding halogen suns, eyes were the only language that mattered. Flow is stable, the perfusionist announced from the head of the bed. You have 30 minutes of cross-clamp time before spinal ischemia becomes a risk. 30 minutes, Lucas repeated calmly. He held out his hand without looking away from the aorta. The scrubbed nurse slapped a needle driver into his palm instantly. Elena moved to suction the field. She didn't need to be told. She saw the angle of Lucas's wrist and knew exactly where he was going to place the first stitch. She moved the suction tip 2 millimeters to the left, clearing the view just as the needle pierced the arterial wall. It was a dance they had practiced 1,000 times in their residency, refined over late-night study sessions and whispered conversations in bed about technique. But tonight it was transcendent. Graft, Lucas murmured. Elena caught the end of the Dacron tube. She held it taut, applying the perfect amount of tension. If she pulled too hard, the suture would tear the fragile tissue. If she pulled too loose, the seal would leak. She felt the vibration of the thread as Lucas pulled it through. It was a physical tether connecting them. Snap, pull, knot. Snap, pull, knot. The rhythm was hypnotic. Retract, Lucas said. Elena shifted her hand. Her glove brushed against his wrist. It wasn't an accident. The space was tight. But instead of pulling away, Lucas leaned into the contact, using her hand as a fulcrum to leverage the needle into a difficult corner of the vessel. For Elena, the contact was electric. It was intimate in a way that sex had never been. This was trust. This was two minds operating a single set of hands. She looked up at him for a split second. His brow was furrowed in concentration, beads of sweat caught in his surgical cap. He looked magnificent. The frailty of the past was obliterated. He was a god of the operating theater, and she was his equal. She was the only one who could keep up with him. He needs me, she thought, the realization hitting her with the force of a drug. Sarah can hold his hand at dinner, but she can't do this. She can't save a life with him. She can't understand the language of blood and steel. Last stitch, Lucas announced. He tied the knot with a flourish of his wrist. Cut, Elena said, snipping the suture tails. They stepped back in unison. The silence in the room deepened. This was the moment of truth. Release the clamp, Lucas ordered. Elena reached in and released the metal jaw that had been holding back the torrent of blood. The aorta filled. The graft bulged, pink and pulsing. They waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. No leaks, Elena whispered. It's dry. We have a pulse, the anesthesiologist called out. BP is stabilizing, 110/70. Lucas let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He looked across the table at Elena, his eyes crinkled at the corners, a smile hidden behind the mask. Good work, he said. The voice was low, intimate. Perfect tension on the distal anastomosis. You led, Elena said, her voice soft. I just followed. We did it, Lucas corrected. He stripped off his bloody gloves and tossed them into the biohazard bin. He didn't leave immediately. He stayed by the table as the residents moved in to close the chest, watching the monitor, watching the life they had saved. Elena stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a warm golden glow. They had fought a war together in the last hour and won. She looked at his profile. The harsh lines of his face seemed softer now. The ice was gone. Surely after this, after saving a man, after moving in perfect synchronization, he felt it too. The bond that couldn't be broken by paperwork or divorce decrees. Lucas, she whispered, daring to use his name again. He turned to her. He didn't correct her. He didn't pull away. Go scrub out, he said gently. I'll write the op note. Meet me in the surgeon's lounge. Meet me. The words echoed in her head like a promise. Elena nodded, her heart soaring. She walked out of the OR, stripping off her gown with trembling hands. She thought about the snow outside, the cold apartment, the empty life she had been living. And then she thought about the heat of the OR, the touch of his wrist, the shared victory. She wasn't just a complication anymore. She was his partner. And tonight, she was sure they were finally going to talk. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as the only two people in the world who understood what had just happened. She walked toward the lounge, oblivious to the fact that the light she was walking toward wasn't the dawn. It was an oncoming train. The surgeon's lounge was a quiet island in the storm of the hospital. It smelled of stale coffee, leather, and the faint lingering scent of ozone from the air purifiers. Elena checked her reflection in the darkened glass of the vending machine before pushing the door open. Her hair was messy, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, but her eyes were bright. She looked alive. For the first time in months, the hollowness in her chest was filled with the warm hum of possibility. She walked in. Lucas was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights blurring through the sleet. He had changed out of his scrubs back into his dress shirt and trousers, though his tie was still undone, hanging loosely around his neck. He held a bottle of water, staring into the middle distance. That was... Elena started, her voice breathless. She closed the door behind her, sealing them in. That was incredible, Lucas. The way you handled the proximal clamp, I haven't seen anyone move that fast since your fellowship. Lucas turned. His face was composed, the adrenaline of the OR already packed away behind his stoic mask. It was a good outcome, he said flatly. The team performed well. It wasn't just the team, Elena said, taking a step closer. She felt brave. The energy from the surgery was still vibrating under her skin. It was us, you and me. We didn't even have to speak. It was just like before. She reached out, her hand hovering near his arm, testing the air. I know I messed up, she whispered, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. I know I was a coward 5 years ago. I was terrified of the sickness, Lucas. I was terrified of losing you, so I left before I could watch you die. It was selfish, but tonight proved that we still have something. That connection? You can't fake that. She looked at him, her heart pounding against her ribs, waiting for him to bridge the gap. She expected him to be angry. She expected him to shout. She expected passion. Lucas looked at her hand near his arm, then up to her eyes. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply took a sip of water. You're confusing muscle memory with affection, Elena, he said. The words were spoken so calmly that it took a moment for them to register. Elena froze. What? We operated well together because we trained together, Lucas explained, his tone clinical, as if explaining a procedure to a med student. It's a neurological pathway. Stimulus, response. It has nothing to do with us. There is no us. How can you say that? Elena's voice rose, desperate. You felt it in there. I know you did. You trusted me. I trusted your hands, Lucas corrected. I know you're a competent surgeon. I needed a competent surgeon to save a patient. That is the extent of the interaction. He set the water bottle down on the low table and walked over to the leather sofa, picking up his suit jacket. You think I came back here for this? He gestured vaguely between them. For some grand reconciliation? Or maybe you think I came back for revenge, to rub my success in your face? Didn't you? Elena asked, tears stinging her eyes. Lucas laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Elena, you aren't that important. The sentence hit her harder than a physical blow. She actually stumbled back a step. When I was in the clinic in Zurich, Lucas said, shrugging on his jacket, I spent 2 years learning how to walk again, how to hold a spoon, how to breathe without pain. Do you know how often I thought about you? He looked her dead in the eye. Never. That's a lie, she whispered. It's the truth, he said, because if I had thought about you, about the betrayal, about the divorce papers you mailed to a hospice ward, I would have died of bitterness. So I excised you, like a tumor. I cut the memory of you out so I could survive. He adjusted his cuffs, checking his watch. I didn't come back to Chicago for you, Elena. I didn't come back to fix us. I didn't come back to break you. I came back because this is the best hospital in the country, and I am the best surgeon for the job. You were just a variable in the equation, a staffing detail I had to manage. He walked toward the door, passing her as if she were a piece of furniture. And I have managed it, he added. Elena turned, grabbing his arm. What does that mean? What have you managed? Lucas looked down at her hand on his sleeve until she let go. We can't work together, Elena, he said, not because of feelings, but because you are incapable of separating the past from the present. Tonight proved that. You almost killed the mood in the moment, or with your emotional projection. I can't have a vascular lead who thinks every surgery is a marriage counseling session. You can't fire me, she stammered. I have tenure. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not firing you, Lucas said softly. I'm setting you free. He opened the door. The harsh light of the hallway flooded into the dim lounge. Check your email in the morning, Dervance. I think you'll find the solution quite generous. He walked out. Elena stood alone in the lounge. The smell of stale coffee suddenly made her nauseous. The false dawn was gone. The sun hadn't risen. It was just the cold, hard light of an operating table, and she was the one being cut open. The morning sun over Chicago was blinding, reflecting off the fresh layer of snow that had buried the city during the night. It was the kind of brightness that promised warmth but delivered only a sharper, clearer cold. Elena sat in her office, the door closed. A single cardboard box sat on her desk. On her computer screen, the email from Human Resources remained open. Subject: Transfer Approval and Promotion, Northwestern Memorial. Dear Dr. Vance, we are pleased to inform you that your candidacy for the Chief of Vascular Surgery at Northwestern has been fast-tracked and approved, per the strong recommendation of Dr. Lucas Thorne. Your transfer is effective immediately. It was a masterpiece of administrative violence. Lucas hadn't fired her. He hadn't demoted her. He had promoted her. He had used his influence to secure her a higher title, a bigger salary, and a prestigious office at a hospital 5 miles away. He had given her everything she had ever claimed to want, and in doing so, he had ensured he would never have to see her face again. Elena reached out and touched the screen, tracing the signature at the bottom of the attached recommendation letter. Lucas Thorne, MD, fax. The letter described her as technically flawless and driven. It was glowing. It was impersonal. It was a eulogy for a marriage written in corporate letterhead. She stood up and began to pack. Her diploma, her award for the rising star in surgery, the framed photo of her and Mark, which she paused over, then placed face down in the bottom of the box. Mark hadn't called. He wouldn't. That was gone too. She cleared the desk in 10 minutes. It was terrifying how little of herself was actually in this room. 5 years of grinding, of missed holidays, of ruthless ambition, and it all fit into one box. Elena put on her coat, the expensive cashmere trench she had bought to celebrate her last promotion. It felt heavy today. She picked up the box and walked to the door. She hesitated, her hand on the knob. Part of her wanted to storm into his office, to throw the promotion in his face, to demand he acknowledge the pain he was causing. But she remembered his eyes in the lounge. You aren't that important. She opened the door. The hallway was busy. Residents were rushing to rounds. Nurses were charting. Life at St. Jude's was moving on, a machine that didn't miss a single gear. She walked toward the elevators, keeping her head high. She was Dr. Elena Vance. She was a chief of surgery now. She wouldn't let them see her bleed. As she passed the main conference room, the glass walls offered a panoramic view of the morning meeting. Lucas was there. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He was leaning back in his chair, listening to a resident present a case. He looked healthy. He looked settled. There was a mug of coffee in front of him, steam rising in a lazy spiral. Next to him sat Sarah, the librarian. She wasn't part of the meeting, obviously, but she was sitting in a chair by the wall, waiting for him, reading a paperback book. At one point, Lucas looked over at her. He didn't say anything. He just looked. And Sarah looked up and smiled. A small, private smile that had nothing to do with medicine or status or money. Lucas smiled back. It wasn't the triumphant smile of a conqueror. It was the quiet, relaxed smile of a man who was finally warm. Elena stopped. The breath hitched in her throat. That was it. That was the punishment. He hadn't destroyed her career. He hadn't ruined her life. He had simply shown her that happiness was possible after the tragedy, but only if you had the courage to stay through the winter. She had left, and because she had left, she was the only one still freezing. Lucas turned his attention back to the resident. He didn't look out the glass. He didn't see her standing there. She was already gone to him. Elena gripped the box tighter, her knuckles turning white. She turned away from the glass, forcing her legs to move. Left foot, right foot. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the man she had thrown away and the life she could have had. The lobby was drafty. The automatic doors hissed open, and the wind hit her instantly. A physical force, biting and cruel. Elena Vance stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city of Chicago sprawled before her, glittering hard and magnificent. She had the title. She had the money. She had the success. She hailed a taxi, clutching her box of awards against her chest, and shivered in her silk coat, realizing for the first time that no matter how high she climbed, it was always going to be cold at the top.